With this in mind, the author has a negative demeanor towards human trafficking. Hence, he begins his book with, I was hardly prepared for the profound emotional impact of the slave ship, A Human History. Marcus also later discussed how difficult it was to write the book, being that there were so many disturbing things that he would come across. He states the facts with none of his own personal opinions throughout the book. Only his beginning statement depicts how he truly felt. It is difficult to imagine the heartache that accompanies the compiling of so many troubling stories from human trafficking. Simply reading the book is heart-wrenching enough. To further demonstrate, Sarah's story was placed at the beginning of the slave ship, aiding in the reader's ability to continue reading. Redeker tells it as, when the young woman came aboard the Liverpool slave ship, she instantly captured everyone's attention. She had beauty, grace, and charisma. Other sailors joined in admiration, and indeed, so did Captain Jacob Evans. The enslaved men on the Hadibras ship erupted in its insurrection. Sarah was suspected and survived her punishment, but then was sold at Granada. Sarah was quite fortunate that her punishment was not as intense as some of the other escapees, which were later told in the book. Marcus begins the slave ship this way to show that not all were treated like complete trash, but even the most favored and pleasant of slaves were poorly treated. He was unfortunate to have all the information thrown at him at once, and had difficulty with it. This being so, he started the reader off on a lighter story in order for them to get a feel for the book. In contrast, Cujo's story, told by Joe Bubar, is depressing and painstaking. Cujo states in his interview with Joe, I see the great many soldiers with a French gun in the hand and a big knife. Soon we get in the ship and they make us lay down in the dark. They don't give us much to eat. Me so thirst. Cujo actually dealt with being traded, and he explains it to Joe. He shares all the hardships and the thoughts of going through his head as it occurred. And he explains it as it occurred, start to finish. Receiving a first-hand account of human trafficking illustrates on an even more personal level. Cujo lived through a great deal of pain, and for him to share his story is great. On the other side, there are the captains/sailors who invoked all this pain. For instance, pirate and sailor Bartholomew Roberts, a young Welshman. He had apparently worked in the slave trade for a while. He was in the trade mainly because he had started at it at a young age. So that is what he knew, so it's also what he stuck with. This was not an excuse for his behavior or choices, but to show how individuals could sometimes end up in the trade. Bartholomew was one of the most successful sea robbers and would often terrorize the African coast. His despicable reputation had him feared everywhere he went, which he enjoyed. People may have ended up joining a trade ship's crew because they thought they would end up with a reputation and attention for it. Got confused there. In addition, for a reader to compile a full analysis on human trafficking, they may desire current perspectives on the matter, such as Muhammad Nasser's opinion. He argues human trafficking is a violation against human rights as a form of slavery, going to show that he is not in favor of human trafficking. One can find others' opinions useful because it then opens their mind up to new ideas that can prove enlightening. Also, it can aid in making a more compulsive argument. Although few individuals can actually argue with Muhammad's statement, in the eyes of most, slavery is immoral. Likewise, Rachel Austin has a similar view as stated in her paper, A Content Analysis on Human Trafficking Frames in Documentaries, Movies, and Television Episodes. There, she mentions human trafficking is a global problem that affects every single nation. She also shares a story about the cocoa farm on the Ivory Coast and how it affected everyone. Sharing with the documentary released, viewers went into action. The first statement shows her personal opinion, which helps in debates to show that others are in compliance with you. The second statement illustrates that when made aware of what is going on, people will stand up for what they believe to be right. The two accounts display various people's perspectives on the matter, all of which line up with being against human trafficking. Finally, someone may want to compare these to the Bible. In Leviticus 25:44, Moses writes, "Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you are to buy slaves." This may come off a little confusing, making it sound like it is acceptable to have slaves. But then going to read Exodus 2:23, the Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out. One can see how miserable certain people were being enslaved. Lastly, 1 Timothy 6:1 wraps it all together. All who are under the yoke of slavery should consider their masters worthy of respect, so that God's name and teaching may not be slandered. I'm just going to read what I wrote. Yes, slavery is seemingly all right when compared to God's word, when followed by God's word. Still treat servants like human beings, and then use the opportunity to share God's undying love for them so that they too may be saved. Throughout reading and comparing The Slave Ship by Marcus Rediker, one can develop many different ideas, most being dismal. A reader can find all of these beliefs and stories helpful when analyzing human trafficking because they can enlighten both that individual and their audience. Human trafficking has been a substantial problem for centuries, and it is a disgusting topic to discuss, but needs to be. Throughout Marcus Rediker's book, The Slave Ship, a reader might find a girl named Sarah's fairly light story, the tragedy of a chef, and the sailor's incentive behind it all. And then a little, I don't totally know what to call it, but I'm not completely positive on the whole Bible thing. I'm going to re-go over that, and I did read the whole paper as I had written it. There were very few things that I changed to what the corrections were from my parents. Thank you, have a great day.